Well, let's get straight into this with Adrian Pabst, Deputy Director of the National Institute of Economic and Social Research, a leading economic think tank. Welcome to Times at One, Adrian. How perilous is the situation in France?
Oh, very perilous indeed. I mean, the French budget deficit is approaching 6% of GDP when under the rules of the EU and the Eurozone, it should be about 3%. And really what's hampering France, but also Germany and Britain, and really all of the major European economies with hardly any exceptions, is low growth. Growth is so low that we just cannot get out of this rut. We're stuck. And if you have low growth, then obviously your debt goes up, your welfare payments go up, and it's just a downward spiral. It's not even just a vicious circle. We're in a downward spiral, and something's going to have to give in order to get out of this terrible mess. So the situation is powerless.
Right. Well, what will have to give, if you like? I mean, economically, what are the choices? As I've just said, everyone feels boxed in.
Absolutely. And the political and economic choices really are, in some sense, quite simple. You either have to raise tax in order to get your debt and your deficit down, or you're going to have to cut spending, or you're going to have to change your fiscal framework in order to allow for more borrowing. But if borrowing isn't an option, or higher borrowing isn't an option, and it isn't really an option for France, though it is an option for Germany, which is lower debt for historic reasons, really. And if higher borrowing isn't an option for the UK either, then it's really all about tax, because spending cuts, as we know, will only provoke greater political and economic and social backlash. We had austerity in the 2010s with some terrible price, including low growth. So cutting spending draconically without other reforms is not going to do it either. So raising taxes is probably the first best option for governments in the short term. But of course, other things will have to happen. Welfare spending is going to have to looked at. And we know from the UK how difficult it is to get it done. But whether it's unemployment in France or economic inactivity in the UK, those are too high. They have to be brought down, and that requires some fundamental structural reforms.
Why are the countries in this situation?
They really haven't tackled those fundamental problems that you mentioned, for the past 15 years. Let's not forget that growth was somewhere in the region of 2.5%, even 3% sometimes per year in the run-up to the financial crisis in 2008-9. And since then, growth has essentially stagnated. It's been just around 1% for most economies on average over the last 15 years. That means, essentially stagnant living wages. And for millions of people, in fact, lower living wages. So unless you get growth up, you cannot service your debt, and you cannot maintain high levels of spending. And then we've had to spend more money, in the process of COVID.
Yes.
Which was the right thing to do, but that also meant adding massively to debt. And we've also had to spend more money during the cost of living crisis, helping households that couldn't make ends meet. So we've spent more, but we haven't been able to get growth going and get tax receipts going to pay for it. So debt's gone up. And now we're stuck in this low growth, low productivity, vicious circle, which, as I said, is more of a downward spiral, because you cannot carry on doing it. You need to tackle those fundamental problems now.
And yet, in France, the government really does look as if it is facing a confidence vote that they will lose. I mean, how serious will that be for the government?
Yeah, so you add to all of the economic and social problems we've just mentioned, political instability, and then it's really a toxic mix. And France is, of course, the prime example here, because it doesn't have a stable government since the early parliamentary elections called by President Macron last year. There's been essentially a minority government that depends on the goodwill of the far left and the radical right, and that's simply not sustainable. So yes, the government is very likely to fall. More instability, more market fright. It is incredibly dangerous, and unless there is, a huge leap forward to say, okay, what is the common national interest and who can get it done? Who's got the credibility to lead a French government through these difficult times? It's going to be very, very difficult to see how this works. The French will have to accept some spending cuts, as well as, of course, other reforms to, unemployment, to other aspects of the welfare state. The question is, who's got the authority to do this? Macron's authority seems pretty much shot to pieces domestically, and it's not clear who that political leader can be And presidential elections are still some 2 years away. So it is very, very dangerous.
Adrian Pabst, thank you very much for talking to us. Well, we've heard the economics and a little bit about the politics, but let's talk about that a bit more. Why do governments keep borrowing instead of confronting voters with the stark choice of cuts or higher taxes? John Rentoul is chief political commentator for The Independent. Hello to you, John.
Hi, Joe.
Why don't governments, parties level with the country here?
Because they wouldn't get elected.
Yes.
If they did. I mean, you can see exactly what happened in the UK. Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer knew perfectly well that taxes were going to have to go up after the election. I mean, it was obvious that the Tories would have to do the same. They would have to raise taxes too if they had won. But they were not prepared to say so because they didn't want to do anything to put Labour's election at risk. I mean, you can say with the benefit of hindsight that they had plenty of space to be a bit more honest with the British people, given the size of their election victory. But no practicing politician before an election can afford to take that view.
I mean, there have long been calls, as you know, for politicians to be straight with the British public about the true state of the economy. Is the truth too hard for voters to bear, or are governments of all stripes just guilty of magical thinking?
Both, I think, is the case. I mean, the voters cannot handle the truth. It is simple as that. I mean, we voters are only human. We don't want to face up to the fact that we are no longer in a period of permanently low interest rates, which we got used to, which seemed to be the sort of norm, and it seemed to be possible to borrow all that money to deal with the coronavirus crisis, but. It should have been obvious to us that if you do borrow £400 billion, it's going to have lasting consequences for your economy and for your public finances.
But is it also the case that governments, this one perhaps and previous ones, don't have a strong enough narrative, don't have the ability to seemingly communicate harder messages to the public and yet still bring people along with them, particularly a government that's got such a large majority?
Well, they don't. I mean, for all his strengths, Keir Starmer's not a good communicator. But I think it is a very difficult message to communicate. I mean, that there is a reason why politicians don't want to say that they're going to raise taxes, because I mean, if you look at all the examples in history of politicians who have raised taxes, John Major, George Bush, and all the rest of them, it doesn't do them any good. It's not what voters want to hear. And the problem is that we have become used since the war to steady growth, or at least periods of steady growth in with recessions in between. But I mean, since the financial crash of 2008. We haven't had steady growth at all. I mean, we've had very, very anemic growth, and our politics hasn't adjusted to that. And, voters still expect high standards of public services for low taxes.
I mean, people say and demand a whole wealth of different things, but do you think now there is an opportunity for more radical parties to gain even more, add to their representation, whether it's Reform, whether it's the Greens, or do you think they can't do anything different either?
No, I don't think they can. I mean, look at Reform's programme. I mean, Nigel Farage wants to spend more money, despite being in many senses a small state conservative. But for example, he's against the 2-child limit on benefits, on grounds of wanting larger families, which is this is a slightly strange combination. But I mean, I remember watching him during the election campaign when he was asked that question live on TV. Obviously, hadn't given it any thought, and he just defaulted to thinking, large families are good. Therefore, we should give benefits to families with more than 2 children.
And actually, the cuts that would need to be made are vast. But as I mentioned at the beginning of the programme, the government's attempts to try and cut things, rightly or wrongly, like winter fuel payment to millions of pensioners or cuts to the welfare bill, have gone down so badly that they've pretty well reversed it. And it seems that voters want things cut that are really quite small and marginal compared to the sort of scale that's necessary if governments want to balance the books the way they've set out.
Absolutely. I mean, you know those U-turns that the Labour government has made were over very small amounts of money in the broad scheme of things.
Yes.
And that just shows how difficult it is, because the only way you're going to get the public finances on a sustainable footing over the long term is for the government to stop doing things, or to raise taxes to the sort of higher end of the European average. I mean, our taxes are not particularly high in this country, but political resistance to raising them is huge. So, I mean, the only thing you could give Nigel Farage credit for, I think, would be that he wants to abolish the NHS, or at least to move from the NHS to a social insurance-based system. I mean, that you could see would have quite a dramatic effect if you could persuade people to pay for their own healthcare to a substantial extent. But you can't see that working in British politics.
Well, certainly there isn't support for it at the moment. Whether or not you could build support in the way you have just outlined is a different thing. I mean, how dangerous is this? I asked our previous guest how perilous it is in France, and he says extremely, because we have this moment of reckoning with this vote in the Parliament next week. But what about in the UK? Is there still time to wait for growth, the ever elusive growth, or is the budget this autumn really going to be a moment of reckoning here, do you think?
No, I think it's going to be a moment of reckoning, because Rachel Reeves rather unwisely suggested at last year's budget that she had wiped the slate clean, I think was her phrase.
Yes.
That she'd fixed the foundations, that she'd put up taxes in a one-off way. She'd raise taxes by 40 billion a year by the end of this Parliament, and that she wasn't going to have to do that sort of thing again. I mean, she rather unwisely said, "I'm not coming back for any tax rises," but then had to correct herself and say, not on that scale. But I mean, now it is beginning to look as if she is going to have to put taxes up again on something like that scale. And I think that's going to go down extremely badly with the voters. I mean, it's not as if the Labour government's popular to start off with.
That's John Rentoul on that happy note, chief political commentator for The Independent. Thank you very much for talking to us on The Times at 1.